Bienvenidos, mis amigos de la ciudad de Salem. I'm talking in Spanish in case you didn't figure that one out. Welcome to another one of our special series of our Noble Globe. And we have with us now Leonide Martin. How do you pronounce your first name again?
Leonide.
Leonide. And we're going to be focusing in on Guatemala today and on the Mayan civilization and her trip there. But before we get that, we're going to learn a little bit about Leonide. And how did you first hear about Guatemala or get interested in? Where did it all begin for you?
Well, I've been studying the Maya for over 20 years. It was late, or you might say a retirement passion that developed. Mm-hmm. And I've always been interested in ancient cultures and history. Mm-hmm. The Maya just intrigued me. It's a Western Hemisphere civilization, the most advanced civilization in the Western Hemisphere. Mm-hmm. An amazing culture and amazing accomplishments in terms of the grandeur of their cities and the complexity of their social structure, the high court system, the art, the calendars, the carvings, truly amazing.
Mm-hmm. Was there a particular person who introduced you to Mayan culture or Guatemala, a role model along the way that was your sort of silent mentor or mentoress?
I have apprenticed and studied with a Mayan elder in the Yucatan who has been very influential in my learning about the Maya. Also, a good friend of mine is a Guatemalan Mayan priestess named Omrak Sapper. And I took a program with her actually in Seattle many years ago. And that kind of got me connected, gave me the Guatemala connection. And it was because of her that I took my first trip to Guatemala.
Marveloso.
Sí, está bien.
Okay. For those of us who don't really know a little bit about Guatemala, I think it would be helpful to give the context. Guatemala is in Central America. It's just below Mexico itself. And it's on the peninsula, rather narrow peninsula between the Atlantic on one side, or the Caribbean part of the Atlantic, and the Pacific on the other side. Mm-hmm. And unlike parts of Mexico, it's usually very, very wet. But before the show, our friend here was telling us that they're having a drought. Tell us a little bit more about the drought that's facing Guatemalans.
Well, they planned this trip that I was on. You know, I took this trip to Guatemala in early May, the first week of May of this year. And they planned it for the dry season because normally speaking, Guatemala gets 1,200 inches of rain a year. That's wet. So, you know, it's a tropical rainforest. A lot of the country is covered with tropical rainforest. But when we arrived in Guatemala, we noticed that things looked drier than we expected them to be. And in fact, one of the guides on our trip told us that this past winter, Guatemala only got 300 inches of rain. It's a huge difference in rainfall. So the jungles were looking a little on the dry side.
Now, a lot of Guatemala, from my Yankee perception, is really not city. You have the big city of Guatemala City, but a lot of it is out in the country, in the jungles and the wetlands and all. Is that true? Is it largely agricultural?
Yes, I would say there's a huge amount of agriculture, probably more than is good for the ecological balance of the rainforest, because they cut back the rainforest in order to cultivate. They grow a lot of corn. I think they grow many other fruits and nuts and products there, but they also do cattle ranching. And for the cattle ranching, they have to burn the rainforest and create,
unfortunate
meadows. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
It's not a good trade-off.
Many of the cities are moderate sized to small, little tiny villages. They only have a few big cities.
Rural.
Yeah.
Now it has volcanoes there too, I believe, in mountainous areas.
They do. Yeah, they do.
Have you seen a volcano in action?
No. Well, yes, but not in Guatemala.
Oh, okay.
In Hawaii, on the Big Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for our trip, we flew into the city of Flores, and Flores is a small city, and you'll see why when you take a look at it, because it's a town completely on an island. Beautiful little island with this huge Lake Pitan Itza surrounding it. because it's in the Petén district, and the Itza were a tribe of the Mayas who settled in that area. But then on the other side, on the land side, another city grew up, which is now part of Flores too. So, and that's where the airport is. I mean, you don't land on the little tiny island. You land on the airport that's on the major land side.
Is that going to be one of the pictures we're going to show?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. We're going to be showing you some pictures of Leonide's recent trip to Guatemala. Took place in May and all. It's not your first trip to Guatemala.
No, it's my third trip to Guatemala.
And when was your first
Fourth,
trip?
actually. Fourth trip to Guatemala.
How long ago was your first?
My first trip was in 2003.
Okay, so 10 years ago.
Yeah, and then I went again in 2006 and 2007 for some Maya conferences that were actually held very close to Flores. We flew into Flores, and then we went around the lake to El Ramato, which is a little village located maybe a half an hour from the ruins of Tikal. And so we went to the ruins of Tikal and did ceremonies there.
Okay. What are some of the principal occupations that people have in Guatemala? I guess farming is big. What else?
Yeah, farming is big. They do a lot of beautiful weaving and tapestry. This skirt that I have on is from Guatemala.
Okay, you want to do a close-up if you can?
And I bought many beautiful fabrics there. You know, they have shawls, and they have dresses and blouses, and then they have table coverings and runners. They do beautiful woven work. So that's one of the things that they do.
Okay.
They produce lots of nice liqueur.
I don't drink that much, very little. Can I ask you, because most people in this part of the country have a passing contact with Mexican Americans, but very few have Guatemalan Americans. And although they both speak the Spanish language, a different accent, I would guess, what would you see are the principal differences in the Guatemalan culture as compared with the southern Mexico culture in the Yucatan, for example? You know, what are we looking at that would distinguish them and help to erase the stereotype that Guatemalans must be like Mexicans?
They dress very differently. The Guatemalans wear, this is actually not very colorful for a Guatemalan fabric. Usually they're multicolored of blues and reds and purples and oranges. And so they wear more colorful clothing with a slightly different style. The Yucatecans tend to dress a lot in white. They wear huipils, huipilis, and they wear guayaberas, which are very simply styled, and then they'll have pretty embroidery around the neck, or around the hem. So they dress differently. Their food is completely different, you know, completely different cuisine in the two areas. For me, speaking Spanish, the Guatemalan Spanish is much more clear and distinct than the southern Mexican.
Claro.
Yeah, sí, muy claro.
Escuche, por favor.
Sí. En la sur, habla más rápidamente. So in the south of Mexico, they speak very quickly, and you know, yeah, exactly.
That means like an airplane.
They blur their words together. It's like they have a southern accent. Whereas the Guatemalans, they tend to speak in a much more paced cadence. They enunciate much more clearly.
Muy interesante, very interesting and enlightening, really.
Yeah.
And all. Okay. What would a typical Guatemalan lunch consist of?
Probably some tamales, beans. They almost always have beans of some sort. Rice, yeah, they could have that.
Veces at times.
And they often have like greens, lots of greens, salads and cucumbers and lettuce and things like that.
So it could be more healthy than some
It's healthier.
Mexican
It's healthy, pretty healthy food, yeah.
Good. Okay. I think we'll begin with starting with our thing. Okay, you went down to Guatemala in May. Where did you land? Guatemala City Airport? Probably.
No, I didn't. I flew from Houston to Belize City, and then I took a little tiny plane from Belize City into Flores. It was small. It was like maybe a 12-seater.
Oh.
Yeah.
That should have been quite an adventure.
Yeah, it was quite an adventure.
Was it about a 2-hour trip or longer?
Well, going from Belize City to Guatemala, I mean, to Flores was only 20 minutes.
Oh, it's that close?
It's very
really?
close, yeah.
Didn't know
very
that.
close.
Okay, I may try that. I've never been to Guatemala. To Costa Rica and Mexico, yes, but not Guatemala.
Yeah, well, some of the people who were in our group flew into Guatemala City, and then they took a plane from Guatemala City to Flores. But to me, they went south and then back north, because you know Guatemala City is farther south than Flores is, because Flores is up close to the north part, like you were saying. Guatemala borders on southern Mexico, and the Mirador Basin, which was where we were going for our tour, goes right up to the border and continues across the border into Mexico. So the Mirador Basin spans both countries. So it's way northern Guatemala going into southern Mexico. And Flores is, you know, maybe 75 miles from the Mirador Basin. So it's much more in the northern part.
Okay. Yeah.
Of Guatemala.
Okay, let's start with our slides, our pictures there.
Okay.
We're going to talk about Flores Island from helicopter in Lake Petan Itza.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about that, but do you have a question about that?
Okay, no. Should we show the pictures?
Yeah, go on. Yeah,
okay.
why don't we go to the next one?
And tell us about Flores Island is in the middle of this lake. And how big is Flores Island, or how many? I know you don't know the population, but
all I can say is you can walk from one end to the other in about 15 minutes.
Okay, so it's a small
It's
island.
small. And it's the streets are very tiny and narrow, and they all kind of wiggle around. They've got like a street that goes around the whole circle, because you know it's just water all the way around, and then the other ones kind of crisscross in between in rather unplanned ways.
Is it a nice romantic place to get
Very,
away?
very romantic place.
Okay, if you want to do something.
It's got nice hotels, nice cuisine.
Okay, is it expensive hotels or?
Not by our standards,
No,
I
so
wouldn't
it'd be
say
a
so.
little
Yeah.
muy barato. A little
Not
cheaper?
muy barato.
Not very cheap.
No, mediante.
Okay, in the middle.
Yeah.
Give us an idea, like if I wanted to go to a typical hotel, or not the bottom of the line, but let's say toward the lower end, what would it be, $70, $80 a night, more than that?
It would be around 80 to 90 probably.
Okay, just to let you know, so you get your budget worked out, especially when there's a rainy season here up north. Sometimes it rains, not all the time, but and are they also suffering from that drought down there, or not so much?
Well, yeah, they're in the same region.
Okay,
Yeah,
but it's
so there won't be so much rain down there.
okay, good. So, and you can probably just take a plane 20 minutes from Houston to Belize, and from Belize to Flores. And the airport is not on the island, but
On the mainland.
On the mainland, on the shore and all. Okay. El Mirador, ancient city, complexes joined by white rolls called sapes. What's that about?
Well, the purpose of this trip, Lee,
Ancient
was
city.
to go to El Mirador. People who are Maya admirers, as we call it, Maya devotees, know about El Mirador. El Mirador is one of the oldest cities. In fact, some people call it the cradle of the Maya culture. And it's very inaccessible. We all want to go. Everyone wants to go, but few people go because it's a bit of an ordeal to get there. You cannot fly in by airplane. You cannot drive in. You can get in by mule train, by walking, or by helicopter. That's how you get there. And it's quite a distance from the nearest actual town. The nearest town is a little town that's on the end of a dirt road, and if you went in by mule train from that town, it'd be like 3 days, you know, overnight.
Incredible.
So our group wisely decided to go by helicopter, and it would have taken a very long time and been very, very difficult
a
physically.
New definition for spinning your wheels.
Yes,
Definitely.
spinning wheels.
What is a helicopter ride like?
It was actually very smooth and much more comfortable than I expected it to be. It's a little on the noisy side, but we were in very modern helicopters.
They equip you with earplugs, don't they? No? They forgot about that part.
No.
Okay, well, you bring your own earplugs
I didn't wear earplugs
before you
no.
take it, yeah.
But our helicopters would hold 4 or 5 people plus the pilot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you have El Mirador reconstruction, the La Danta
Well,
complex.
let me tell you something more about El Mirador.
Yep.
And we've got 2 slides of El Mirador, and the first one gives you kind of an overview of how the city might have been laid out in ancient times. Now, El Mirador was at the height of its population and functioning between 300 BC to about 150 AD. But the history of civilization in that part of Guatemala, the Mirador Basin, goes back 800 or more BC. And we know there were settlers way longer than that.
Caramba.
Yeah, ay caramba. But now we're talking about like cities. Actual cities were developing around that time. So in this huge basin, which is about 8,100 square miles in size, it's an enormous kind of low area. It's full of what they call bajos. And the bajos are kind of watery, swampy areas. They're like little ponds, and I think they just fill up from, you know, the rain because they don't have rivers. Well, no, they do actually have rivers in Guatemala, but not in that particular area too much. So this city, we think, got founded there because the soil was very fertile from all the swamps. You know, over many, many years, that all the vegetation would, you know, decompose and feed the soil. So this huge city was there. It's probably one of the biggest cities of any Maya city that ever existed. They think it may have had up to 100,000 population at its height.
That is
It covered
gigantic.
It covered an area of about 14 square miles.
It was the capital of the Mayan civilization?
It was a leader. It was the major city of what we call the pre-classic period.
So their ruler had a palace there or something like that?
Oh, they had palaces. They had palaces, they had pyramids. In fact, this pyramid that I'm going to talk about, called La Danta, is considered the tallest pyramid of all the Maya pyramids. It stands 230 feet high. Which is higher than Temple 4 in Tikal, which is 212 feet, and it's a very high pyramid. And it's this La Danta complex is seated on a platform that's like 850 by 2,000 feet in dimensions, and it goes up one level and then the next level and the next level, and I'm talking about platforms, not the pyramid itself. So there's many smaller structures all around on the platforms, and you go walk this platform, then you go to the next, and you walk that platform, you go to the next, walk that platform. Finally you get to the pyramid, but by this time you've already gone up, you know, many hundred feet, and then the pyramid, you know, makes a really big peak right at the end. So it's a very huge structure. Probably the most massive pyramid structure in the world. They think around 99 million cubic feet. So this very ancient city has been sort of abandoned for many, many centuries, you know.
Is it a World Heritage Site?
It's not. It hasn't
yet?
been designated as a World Heritage Site. It probably should be.
Okay.
But it hasn't been reconstructed. Like, you know, when people come to Tikal, when people come to Chichen Itza, when they come to Palenque or Uxmal, you're seeing many, many, many of the pyramids and the temples and the palaces and the residential structures. They've all been reconstructed. But because Mirador is in the middle of nowhere, and you can't get heavy equipment in there. It's really hard to get equipment in there. You're going to bring them in on a mule train?
Isolated.
Yeah, it's isolated. Okay. So they haven't been able to do a whole lot of reconstruction. I really should say a word about the archaeologist who's primarily worked in the Mirador Basin project.
And also tell us about La Danta a little bit more.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll get to the archaeologist. So, La Danta, we walked there. I think the second day that we were camping in El Mirador. We actually were in tents. You know, there were no facilities. So we walked along these roads that they call the Sacbe, and Sacbe in Maya means white road or white way, and the Mayas would build these roads maybe 15, 20 feet above the level of the jungle floor, and they could be as wide as 25, 50. The huge Sacbe in El Mirador was 150 feet wide. Can you imagine? An immense road just plowing through the jungle. And so our group, with our leader, Ed Barnhart, were walking along the road that was once this great wide sock bay. Now it just looks like a kind of a flat path in the jungle with the trees growing, you know, huge trees growing up on either side. And then the roots cross over. So when you're walking along, you have to be careful not to trip over the roots. Sure. So we walked 5 miles to get to this pyramid. And then we had to climb and climb and climb and climb. Okay. And to get up to the very top, there was a switchback ladder made out of wood. And so, you know, with a little handrail. It's not for the faint of heart or anybody who has a fear of heights.
Were you in physical shape to be able to take it with the strain on you a little bit, or what? How did it feel?
I was a little concerned about that because I am not a youthful person anymore. But I was in good physical.
You're a junior senior citizen.
Yeah, junior senior citizen. But my physical shape was good enough, and I actually managed to do quite well.
Manos calientes.
Ah, sí, bueno.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not. But let me tell you, Lee, there were 2 people on our trip in our group of 10 people who were there, who were almost, you would call them nearly physically handicapped, and one was a gentleman who was what was he, 78 years old?
So fragile.
Yeah, and he had knee problems. And he had to walk very carefully. And the other one was a lady, a woman who was probably in her early 70s, and she also had hip and knee problems. And so they they got to ride on the mules when we would go on these long sock bays. But I was amazed at them. They were so determined to have this experience. They climbed up those pyramids.
Defying age gravity.
Exactly.
It's my own little crazy coin term.
Yeah, I mean, I was so proud of. We were really kind of a senior group, with the exception of a young family, this young couple with their 2 boys who were like 12 and 14, and then another younger lady who was probably in her late 20s or early 30s. But the rest of us were kind of up there.
Let me ask an offbeat question. Before you went to Guatemala for the first time, was your perception very different from what you actually found there? Because some people have these impressions that are built up in their mind, and reality shows them differently. How did it work for you?
Well, remember, Lee, I'm a scholar of the Maya. So I had read many, many, many books about Maya culture in Guatemala, both ancient and modern. So
no big cultural shock for you?
No big cultural shock, no big surprises.
That's important to know.
Yeah.
But for the average person, it might be more of a shock.
But I must say, on my first trip to Guatemala, which was back in 2003, and so they were still a little politically unstable. And my husband and I, were staying in Belize, and we took a tour from the resort that we were staying in. So we were in an official little tour van. But when we crossed the border into Guatemala, there were so many federales there, and troops with their machine guns slung over their shoulders, and a very big military presence. They didn't bother us, but it kind of gave you a little uneasy feeling. Now it's quite a bit more relaxed.
Right.
Yeah.
For those of you who weren't around in the 1950s, I think it was Jacobo Arbenz or something like that, and he was set up a sort of a communist-type state in Guatemala during the Eisenhower years, and he was maybe public enemy #1 of the CIA, if I can mention their name publicly, and a lot of commotion about so close to the United States relatively before. It was Cuba was not yet communist, so that the Guatemalan threat perceived was pretty much, and I think they worked to assassinate somebody down there, and they did have these firing squads and loss of lives and people being
Guatemala's history is really very bloody, and it's very hard on the native people and the peasants. They've been really attacked and killed and displaced, and it's a very difficult history.
On the other hand, it was Roberta something or other. There was a brilliant woman, an author, who won some kind of peace prize down there in the 1990s, I think.
Oh, yes.
but I can't remember the name. But she was a local heroine.
Rigoberto Manchu.
Roberta Manchu, right?
Yes,
She was
yes,
a
brilliant
local
woman.
heroine.
Yes,
I can
very
remember
much,
that.
very much. I admire her greatly. Yeah.
So think positive about Guatemala and all. What does the name Guatemala actually mean? Is there a translation? Or
Not that I know of.
Okay. It's not like mala being bad or whatever.
No,
Okay,
no, I
so
don't
let's
think
not
so.
go there and
No,
all.
I don't believe so.
Okay. We have about just 2 more minutes. Let's talk about the frieze in Central Acropolis at El Mirador. What was that? What was the purpose of that? What
Now
did that
that
show
was
you?
really fascinating. Richard Hansen, he was the archaeologist I wanted to
Yeah.
mention, who is the head of the Mirador Basin project, and he's been working down there since the 1970s. And he and his team were digging at one of the structures. It was called the Central Acropolis structure. And they found this amazing carved panel buried underneath another structure. And that's what had protected it all these centuries. Otherwise, it would have been deteriorated. It is an amazingly beautiful, beautiful panel, and there's a picture of it.
Okay, it's going to go on the camera.
Yeah.
And
And
by the way- go ahead.
it shows two young men in what's called the swimming god posture. So they actually kind of look like they're swimming with their legs behind and their arms up here like this. And it's felt by many archaeologists that this is a very early rendition of the story of the hero twins from the Popol Vuh. Now, that is a very major, important piece of information because many people thought that the Popol Vuh was so influenced by the Spaniards because the version of it that we have in written form is post-colonial. So they thought, now, you know, we can't take this to be a true rendition of Maya religious beliefs and mythology because it's been too influenced by the Spaniards and Catholicism. But now when they're finding this panel, and then there was another mural at San Bartolo that they found that also had themes from the Popol Vuh, and these are pre-classic. So this is way before any contact with Europeans.
Okay. Yeah. We have about half a minute of showtime here.
Okay.
In closing thoughts, what persona would you like to project for the Guatemalan people that you've met? What are they like? What's a typical
They are
Guatemalan?
very, very lovely.
Escuche, listen up.
Yeah, they're lovely people. They're both physically and socially very beautiful, very gracious. They're friendly. I have a lot of admiration for the people of Guatemala. They do the best that they can in very difficult circumstances.
Good.
And could I say one thing about my book?
Okay, 10 seconds.
Okay. I'm an author. I write historical fiction about the ancient Maya, and the book that is about to be published is called The Mayan Red Queen, Tzakbuahau of Palenque. And this is the story of the third of 4 powerful queens that ruled the city of Palenque in Chiapas in Mexico.
Okay, very interesting. Well, okay, find out a book. You have a website for your book?
Yes, I do.
Tell.
www.mistsofpalenque.com.
Okay. Last closing comment. Is there any particular thing about a Mayan god or goddess that you'd like to tell the audience?
The goddess Ixchel is highly revered in Maya culture, and she is going to figure very large in the last book in my series. She's the mother goddess. She's called Lady Rainbow. She's the midwife. She's the healer. She's also a goddess of birth and death, transition and transformation.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Leonide Martin, for educating us, our cabezas, our heads, filling it lleno de conocimiento para el futuro, which means full of knowledge and insight for the future, I think.
Sí, espero
like
que es una buena experiencia para todos.
Okay. See you soon, and make sure that you come to Guatemala and come back on our station and give us a report about your thing, or any other countries. And if you have any ideas for future guests who have done travel overseas for extensive times and want to share that with us, para compartir su experiencia en el otro lado del mundo, tell us, dígale. Okay, thanks, and enjoy. Have a beautiful summer. See you soon. Bye for the Noble Globe. Signing off. Bye.